Hello, Burlington. I'm Mayor Marianne Mead Ward. Welcome to the next edition of Burlington Matters. Today on the show, I have with me Mary Battaglia, our city's Director of Roads, Parks, and Forestry. We'll be talking about snow clearing and trees, two very important things that in this most recent budget, capital and operating, the city invested some additional dollars. So let's get started, and thank you for joining us. Hello, Burlington. I'm Mayor Marianne Mead Ward, and joining me today is Mary Battaglia, our city's Director of Roads, Parks, and Forestry. This is the next edition of Burlington Matters. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're going to talk about snow clearing. We had a tough winter, and we're going to talk about what that means, what we learned from it, and where we're going from here. We're also going to talk about trees and tree planting just in time for spring. So let's get started, Mary, on just some of the things that you saw this year which made it an unusual winter for us.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to come on to talk about some of the issues that we've had. As we both know, it was a tough winter, and there were a lot of people very concerned about our snow clearing operation. We had one of our toughest winters. It started out great in December, and we started thinking we were going to be in for an easy winter, and it really turned into the opposite. It wasn't so much the volume of snow we had. We had, in particular, more incidents than I've ever seen of freeze-thaw cycles, including some with rain or freezing rain, and that really made it difficult and challenging for us, both in terms of trying to keep roadways clear, but our service levels are not all that well understood by residents in Burlington, in particular on local roads. And that service level that we are delivering then became problematic with the amount of ice that had built up on those roads.
So let's talk about the service levels. Those are set by council, so if there's concern, and we certainly heard it, council members, all of us got flooded with calls, as I know your call center did, and many of your operators heard the concerns. The good news is that we heard them, and we're going to be making some changes, and we'll come to that. But what are currently the service standards? And ultimately, you've heard me say this before, if there's a concern about our service standards, that's council's responsibility to fix, because we set those standards and we provide the funding for it. So we will, and we are, but let's talk about what we have on the ground right now.
Sure. So on primary and secondary roads, so those will be our busiest, highest volume traffic roads, we plow when there's 5 centimeters of snow, and we also use applications of brine or salt, which help us achieve a bare level of pavement service. So the difference is that on local roads, which are the residential roads or the ones with much lower volumes of traffic, our service level is only to plow after 7.5 centimeters of snow have accumulated, and it is not to plow to a bare service level. So what that means is without salt, the snow will form a hard pack and it will bond to the road. Without that salt layer, there's no way you are going to stop the snow from bonding to the road.
Because it gets packed down
Because
by
it
cars.
gets packed down and then it's bonded onto the asphalt. So in a normal winter, it usually is very drivable, very achievable. This winter, with the accumulation of ice and repeated storms, what we ended up with then was a lot of roads that looked like they had craters in them, just where you would have some freezing and then some thawing. There would be almost like a pothole formed in the snow or the ice, and that made it challenging for residents to drive on. You really had to drive slow, and so we did get a fair amount of complaints about that service level. So it is one of the ones that we are looking at for next year to see, is there a different way that we can get in earlier to those roads? But we will also come back to council after a staff direction was given to look at a number of issues on what can we do different, what can we do better, and what would the cost be. So once we have those, we will be bringing them back to council for consideration, and then a decision can be made for next year's budget in terms of if there are additional items to add in, or if we look at over multiple years changing the service levels but keeping the cost at a reasonable increase.
So in terms of service levels, you you wouldn't be necessarily recommending that we put salt down, because you have to do that. My understanding is you have to do that before the snow falls in anticipation of the storm to prevent that bonding.
That's correct. So part of our service is to ensure that we have a salt management plan. So because the salt is damaging to the environment, and everything that ends up on the roads will eventually wash out in the storm sewer system and end up in Lake Ontario. So it is our responsibility to manage that salt level and how much is going on the roads. But what we can do is look at getting plows in earlier onto those roads, or if we have another winter like this, is there another option to go in and be able to clear the ice? So those are all the types of things that we will be looking at.
I recently saw a picture of an icebreaker machine. It looks like a giant meat tenderizer on a wheel on the front of a truck. That was from Ottawa, where I lived for 8 years, high school and university. So I know the winters there very well, and so that might be, I suppose that might be one of our options to look at investing in something like that would go in and break up the ice. Those are probably very expensive pieces of equipment, but
they are, as is a grader or something like that would come in. So we really need to weigh our options. At this point, it really is taking a good look at our services from a fresh perspective, and even though we've done it this way for so many years, is there options to make things better? Mm-hmm. The sidewalks is another good example where our service level was not very good for ice on sidewalks. In fact, it is worded something to the effect that materials will only be applied on primary and secondary sidewalks when they are very slippery. So,
and that would be sand. You don't put
sometimes we would put salt
on an ice pack.
A lot of times we would use sand. When we say sand, it's actually a pickle mix, so it's 5% salt and 95% sand. So it does give us a little bit of melting, but gives that traction with the sand. The problem with sand is that as soon as you have melting or freezing overnight, the sand will drop down. You'll get a new layer of ice formed over top. But what we are doing is we will have 4 more operators added for next year. It will give us the opportunity to run a 24/7 sanding or salting operation on sidewalks if it becomes necessary. So that will be a change in service level. We still think we may need to add a little more staff, but we will start with the 4 additional and see how we do for next winter in terms of being able to provide that service. We all know that the city has been promoting mobility options and wanting to give people the opportunity to walk and cycle and all the rest that goes with that. And in order to meet that, we really need to look at the winter operations and ensure that we're providing that opportunity for people by maintaining the sidewalks and pathways to a level where they can be usable.
That's one of the things I heard an awful lot about, because our current service standard is to plow the road first and then the sidewalk, and you do have to sequence those so that you're not constantly pushing the snow that you just cleared off the sidewalk. The big plow goes by on the road and puts it right back onto the sidewalk. So there's some logic to it, but there have been other countries in Scandinavia, for example, that have looked at walkability and looked at actually plowing their sidewalks first, and the roads come after. And I think certainly the feedback that I heard from, and you probably heard from the community, was that we do need to start prioritizing sidewalks where we can, doing a much better service. One of the things that we heard about as well was trails, as you mentioned, and walking corridors to schools. So we did invest in previous years, the Hydro Corridor, for example, that runs just south of New Street, was not plowed as a routine item just a couple of years ago. So we added that because we recognized that was a key transportation corridor. But there's a lot of other trails out there that are not yet plowed. So that's something that you'll be coming back to us with.
So we will be taking a look at our trail system and making some recommendations. Some that have been added in the past may have been for reasons that weren't necessarily legitimate. So we want to take a look across the city to see what makes sense, what are people looking for, and what would the cost be. We do have to be somewhat careful or cautious in terms of liability concerns. So for example, where we have pathways that are not lit and that may be hilly, that becomes a consideration that we need to look at in terms of if it's an unlit path and it is hilly, and then there's an opportunity for black ice to form without anyone being able to see it, it becomes a little more problematic. But those are some of the things that we need to look at in terms of lighting on trails if we do want to make them available longer than daylight hours.
The provincial government recently made some changes to sidewalk clearing legislation. So in the past, there was legislated standards that only applied to roadways. So we had to get out, we had to clear them because we would attract liability if we weren't meeting our standards and somebody was in an accident, the city would be liable. They've now added sidewalks. So talk to us a little bit about what that change means.
Yes, so previously there was nothing that spoke about winter service for sidewalks within the minimum maintenance standards, and I always stumble
MMS.
over that word, so from now on I'm just going to call it MMS. So the MMS did take a look at creating standards for sidewalks, for bike paths, and for anything that is used as a sidewalk. So one of our trails that services, for example, to the GO station would be another good example. So it has now set standards for inspection. So just as we are responsible for inspecting the roads and ensuring that they are in a safe condition, the same will occur for sidewalks. So it's looking at representative sidewalks. Are they being held to standards? So without the budget to do it and the changes to our service levels, we are not keeping up currently with that minimum maintenance standard. But the introduction of those 4 extra staff will get us a long way there in terms of meeting the standards. And we will be putting out clearer information for the next season in terms of what those significant weather events mean when we do declare those. We actually just watched a webinar from a law firm that gave a much better explanation in terms of what the municipality's responsibilities are in terms of declaring those winter events. So that any time that there is freezing rain, snow, anything that would impact on safe travel, then the city can declare a significant weather event. What that does is it gives us time to get things back in better condition. And it alerts the public that they need to be cautious during that time because the roads are under service or the sidewalks.
So it may take a little longer than our normal standards if there's a significant weather event.
That's right.
Then we'd alert the public to be aware of that.
And we will alert them when that significant weather event is declared over. Once it's declared over, the roads or sidewalks are deemed to be in reasonable condition for 48 hours after. The problem with sidewalks is you can have freeze thaw so quickly and repeatedly that it is very challenging to be able to say we're going to have them safe 24 hours a day, every day, all winter. We're never going to be able to guarantee that, but what we can do is at least meet the minimum standards and ensure that we are doing the best that we can within those service levels to make sure that for a 48-hour period anyway, they should be relatively safe.
So those standards apply to both repair and the condition of sidewalks as well as to the snow clearing standards? Just on the roads?
No, roads and sidewalks.
Roads and sidewalks.
Yes.
So it's both for roads and sidewalks, yeah. And you know, folks are, even though we had an extreme winter this year with the freeze-thaw cycle, we know that is the pattern. That's becoming the pattern with climate change and changing weather patterns. And we certainly build that into our asset management for roads, right? The freeze-thaw cycle is deadly for asphalt. It creates cracks and all things that you know well about. So we've already anticipated that this is actually the new normal, even though it's unusual and compared to last year's winter, where I think we had a $600,000 favorable variance on snow clearing last year. Yes, we're not going to see that. I have to warn folks, we're not going to see that this year. But yeah, that's the difference, right? And but we know that with changing weather that we're going to see more of those extreme patterns, and so we have to be prepared. And I think that's what council was very keen to get some information back from staff.
Yes, and I think just by looking at it and bringing forward options, if we continue to see the freeze-thaw happening, like very well could with climate change, then it will prepare us better for the future in terms of what to expect and what we can react to. The problem is that you need to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I would caution is that we do need residents to be patient when we are out there, and recognize that it does take some time to get through all of the service levels. We also know that this year we had an issue with salt and being able to
ask you about that. Did we run out of salt?
So we never ran out of salt. We did get very low, and it was enough of a concern that we switched to sand on secondaries at one point to ensure that we were holding back on the salt for the primary routes. What we ended up doing at one point was hiring our own trucking company to go up to the mines to get more loads brought down. So we managed to get through that way. My understanding is that there was a 12-week strike at the mine, and that then put their production behind schedule. The other part is that when there is a winter like this that's bad and it's unanticipated for, as much as they may be mining salt, they may not have anticipated, like all of us did, that we would not have a winter that would be this much freeze and thaw. So everyone was running low or running very close to low. So at least we got through it, and our salt is back up, even knock on wood. Hopefully we're done for the season. But as part of that, as you know, Council has approved $200,000 for us to complete coverage of a storage area that will provide some more capacity for us for next winter. So that also will be helpful.
So that'll give us 3 in total.
Yes.
That we can use for salt, or the pickle mix.
Yes.
That you call, which is a little bit of salt and mostly sand. And they're covered domes to keep them in better condition,
That's
obviously.
correct. So the earlier we can buy in salt, we do save money. So this year we bought in as much as we could early, and that ended up saving just over $30,000 by purchasing before the November cutoff date for when the prices change.
Well, good for us. Save a little bit of money, and that stuff doesn't go bad. I'm guessing salt doesn't ever deteriorate. There's no best before date, so making sure that we have that we fill those domes is early is really prudent. Let's switch gears now and talk about spring, which I think we're all more than ready for, and tree planting, because in this budget we also, council and staff working together, invested in some more resources for our tree canopy as well as new tree planting. So let's talk about that. Why don't you walk us through what we did?
Certainly. So the Emerald Ash Borer has created a situation where we are losing a large part of the canopy in Burlington. We are replanting, but that planting is primarily happening in on-street tree where the trees have been cut down. They're about a year behind in terms of by the time the stumping happens and then the planting, it's about a year after a tree has come down. So residents obviously want to see trees in the ground as quickly as possible.
Absolutely.
And so when we brought the issue forward about the additional funding that was needed for the Emerald Ash Borer program, then it was raised by council about, can we put more money that is specific to tree planting? So that $100,000 that was approved, we are taking a look at how to best utilize that. Because we already know we have funds set aside for the street tree planting, what we are planning to do is target parks for the first year for that $100,000. So we will be trying to look at larger caliber trees, if it makes sense, and trying to create shade areas in parks, because we do hear about that quite often.
Absolutely.
So we will be targeting the parks that we think are going to benefit the most. So if there are playgrounds that don't have a lot of shade around them or splash pads, then those are good areas for us to be able to establish new plantings. And by adding that $100,000 a year, it's going to go a long way to helping us. It's roughly about $300 a tree for the size that we are planting. So that gives you a rough idea of how many.
That's a fair bit of trees, which is great. One of the things that that we also addressed this budget which was sort of a new, unanticipated need, was how we handle our woodlots, and those are often well used by folks and become a part of a park system.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking of the woodlot, for example, that's right north of the Rotary Youth Center on Guelph Line. Folks use it to walk their dog. It's a really nice place to walk. It's not an official trail, it's not an official park, but it's used by the public that way. And there were quite a few ash trees in there that needed to come down. So that's just one example of a woodlot, but that was not, my understanding, that was not part of our tree management program until very recently.
So the original funding for emerald ash borer did not contemplate the woodlots and what we would need to do in those. So that's where we have seen a spike in our spending. And really we have only taken care of the worst ones where we felt there was a significant hazard and liability. So what we would like to do now is the urban forest management plan is due for update. It should be done about every 5 years. We are at the 9-year mark now. So
well overdue.
Yes. So by putting that plan back under review, what it will do is that plan never had a section that addressed woodlands or woodlots. So that is what we will ensure happens with the next review. It will also include doing a proper aerial survey where we will get real numbers in terms of what is our canopy currently at. And that survey needs to be done in a certain way that we can then be able to use that data going forward. By repeating the same aerial overview, we will be able to tell over time how much our canopy is increasing or decreasing.
Yeah, that's very important. And, you know, on our own city website, I think the last time we took a rough guesstimate of our tree canopy, it was roughly 17% coverage, something like that. And we know we've lost ground, lost trees literally due to largely the emerald ash borer, but other invasive species, disease, development. And a healthy tree canopy is, you know, depending on, you know, which service you look at, is close to 40 or 50%. So we're a long way from that. So I certainly, I'm excited to get on with reviewing our tree canopy and then looking at what type of investments would we need to be making, and partnerships as well. I think the city can't do it all alone, and there was a recent announcement I'm sure you saw from the federal government around some assistance to handle invasive species in urban areas.
Yes, so it's long overdue that either the federal or provincial government took a look at this issue. It has been entirely borne by municipalities when there has been a significant outbreak, such as the emerald ash borer, and the cost is large. And for it to be borne at I know we're all taxpayers and we all pay for tax one way or the other. But if it's looked at a federal or provincial level, at least then it provides relief at the residential level so that it is spread out, and it really is an issue that will move across the country. And so I'm very happy to see that, and it may take some time, but hopefully some good will come out of that, and we will see some assistance from other levels of government.
Well, and one of the ones that's right on our doorstep already, of course, is the gypsy moth, which has been around in Burlington for a long time. We used to live up in Tyndale on a ravine and saw the devastation that they would do. So as part of this budget, we've added some funding to spray areas where we know the gypsy moth are going to do damage.
Yes, so gypsy moth is very cyclical in nature, so you will usually have about every 10 years or so it will spike and you'll get a higher increase in numbers, and that's where you can start to see devastation or defoliation. Most trees can handle defoliation once. It's if they're getting repeatedly defoliated or depending on the health of the tree. And so we are looking at spraying approximately 120 hectares in Burlington of public property. And that's where the egg counts are, the egg masses, the number has reached the threshold level where spraying is recommended. So it is a safe product. It's BTK is what the product is called, and we will be looking at a window of time in May, early June. It has to be exactly the right timing when the caterpillars have emerged to a certain stage and where the leaves on the trees have come out to a certain level. That's when you're going to get the best uptake of the product. So this will be aerial spraying. It will be done by helicopter, so there will be much more coming in terms of communication to the public, and it has been shown to be effective. The last time Burlington was sprayed by the city, any aerial spraying, was in 2008. So we're hopeful that we can end up with a good time frame and have good uptake of the product to knock back the number of gypsy moth.
We were talking about the value of partnerships, so looking at the federal strategy on trees. We have a lot of local partners who have been helping us, and I know that we at the municipality can't do this by ourselves, so we have Burlington Hydro that has helped, Conservation Halton, Union Gas, Burlington Green, of course. We've had tree planting days. Talk to us a little bit about those partnerships.
So they're managed primarily by our manager of urban forestry, so I'm not up to date on all the ones that are in for this year and coming, but we welcome any corporate sponsorships, and certainly if anyone is listening out there and has a company that would be interested in contributing to our urban forest, we welcome any donations. And Burlington Green has done a wonderful job in assisting us with not only arranging some of the plantings and getting people out, as well as the cleanup that they do, but also in educating the public about the value of trees and
how to take care of them.
And how to take care of them, and making sure that they have been right behind you as far as the private tree bylaw, and wanting to see that implemented not only in Roseland but across the city. So
and that started March 1st.
Yes, so it started March 1st in Roseland, so that is our pilot area. However, we will be going out soon with to educate and get feedback on what a citywide bylaw would look like and how supportive people would be. So that will be coming soon, and we look forward to talking to others across the city and educating and hopefully gaining their support for the bylaw to go citywide.
Wow, excellent. Well, we're almost out of time, so I'd like to leave on a lighter note. A favorite book or movie or something you've recently picked up and thought was great?
I've been, right before the Oscars, I of course usually watch a number of the movies that are on there, and I really did. I hadn't heard anything about The Green Book, and I loved the movie. I thought it was so well done.
I hadn't heard about it either, so I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, Black Klansman was another one
that one
was
I saw.
Really good as well.
That was amazing. Mm-hmm. That was shocking and funny and profound all at the same time. It was great. Well, thank you, Mary, for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you at home for joining us today to talk about trees and snow clearing, and hopefully we'll see more trees than snow in the next couple of weeks. Thanks for joining us here on Burlington Matters. If you have any questions or feedback for me, you can reach out at mayor@burlington.ca. Good night.